Under the rain and cold, a little girl begs, "Mum, don't leave me here alone." But the car drives away, and silence takes over the road. Hours later, a man on his way to an important meeting sees a child lying on the asphalt. When he approaches, his heart freezes. It's his daughter, and at that moment, he makes the worst decision of his life. A choice that will reveal the cruelest lie hidden inside his own home. The sound of the rain against the panoramic window of the 30th floor office was like distant applause, a background noise that Arthur barely noticed. His eyes, as cold and blue as the numbers dancing on the screen before him, were fixed on his stock performance chart. The profit he'd made that morning was already enough to buy an entire city block in Queens, where he was born, but to him, it was just another day at the office. Another confirmation that the universe operated under logical, predictable rules. He had built an incalculable fortune, a net worth that spanned continents, transforming a small initial capital into a business empire. He was a man who didn't believe in fate, only in strategy and control. Everything in his life was meticulously planned, from his crypto investments to his marriage to Helena, a woman who seemed sculpted to complement his image of success. Nothing, absolutely nothing key, escaped his domain. It was then that his personal phone, the device for which only a select few had the number, vibrated on the polished mahogany desk. Helena's name flashed on the screen. He answered with a restrained sigh, expecting a complaint about a cancelled dinner or the weekend's charity gala. But the voice that hit him from the other end of the line was not that of his calm, collected wife. It was a broken sound, torn by a panic that made every muscle in Arthur's body go rigid. "She's gone," Helena sobbed, the words stumbling over each other. "Arthur, Liv, she's vanished. We were in the car. I stopped for just a second and she's gone." The next sentence was a choked whisper. Her fever got worse. I panicked. Arthur's world, built on the certainty of numbers and the solidity of his money, began to crumble. He shot to his feet, knocking over a stack of reports. What do you mean gone? Where are you?" he snarled, his voice overflowing with the icy fury that was his first defense against fear. Helena stammered the name of a county road, a route they rarely used, claiming she was trying to take a shortcut to the hospital. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. He hung up without a goodbye, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged animal. For the first time in decades, the multimillionaire felt the ground disappear from under his feet. Control was an illusion. He rode the private elevator down, every second a torture. The rain outside now seemed a violent torrent, a reflection of the storm brewing inside him. He ignored his driver and took the wheel of his luxury sedan, speeding through the flooded streets of Manhattan. His mind, once an oasis of calm and calculation, was a whirlwind of guilt. He remembered Liv's pale face that morning, her large, feverish eyes fixed on him as he left for yet another meeting. He had only patted her head distractedly, his mind already elsewhere, calculating interest rates and dividends. A knot formed in his throat, so tight he could barely breathe. Guided by a blind, desperate instinct, he drove in the direction Helena had indicated. The road was dark and deserted, the trees bending under the weight of the wind. The car's headlights cut through the curtain of water, sweeping across the grim landscape. And then he saw it, a small, huddled shape on the shoulder, a shadow that could have been anything, an animal perhaps. But his heart knew before his eyes could confirm. He slammed on the brakes so hard the car skidded on the wet asphalt. He leapt out into the rain, his expensive suit soaked in seconds. There, collapsed on the muddy grass, was his daughter, small, fragile, shaking uncontrollably. He knelt, the sound of his own cry lost in the roar of the storm, and touched her forehead. It was burning. Liv was burning with fever, abandoned in the middle of nowhere. And as he looked into the dark expanse of that road, a terrible certainty struck him. This was no accident. The drive to the hospital was a blur of lights and sound. Arthur wrapped little Liv in his suit jacket, the heavy, expensive fabric serving as a fragile cocoon against the cold. He held her against his chest, feeling the feverish heat radiating from her tiny body, a heat that scared him more than any stock market crash. Every red light was an affront, every slow car in his path an intolerable obstacle. He, the man who commanded an empire of assets, who moved the market with a single buy order, was utterly powerless. His mind, trained to find patterns and solutions, was a chaos of images. Liv's frightened face, the dark road, the relentless rain. Guilt was a cold razor at his throat. He had delegated the care of his only daughter, treating her like just another item on his long list of responsibilities, an asset to be managed by others. And now, the price of that neglect was here, burning in his arms. At the private hospital, one of the most expensive in the country, money spoke louder than despair. A team was mobilized instantly. As nurses whisked Liv away to the pediatric emergency unit, Arthur was left behind, drenched and lost in the sterile white corridor. It was then that Helena arrived. She ran toward him, her face a mask of distress, her eyes red and swollen. "You found her?" "Oh, thank God, Arthur," she cried, clinging to him. "I turned around for a second, just 1 second, to get my phone from my purse to call you. The fever made her confused. She must have gotten out of the car. I panicked. I looked everywhere." The story was plausible. The performance impeccable. Arthur, desperate for an explanation that didn't make him an accomplice to a monster, clung to those words. He hugged her, feeling a bitter relief. It was easier to believe in an accident, a moment of carelessness, than in the terrible possibility his intuition was whispering. Hours dragged on. Liv was stabilized and moved to a private room. The doctor, a gray-haired man with a serene gaze, explained the situation with professional calm. The girl had a severe infection, was dehydrated and exhausted, but with the proper care, she would be fine. Arthur listened, but the words seemed distant. He stared through the glass at his daughter, lying in a bed too big for her, connected to monitors that blinked in a steady, frightening rhythm. Helena sat beside him, holding his hand tightly, whispering words of comfort and shared guilt. "We'll get through this, darling. She's strong." Arthur just nodded. His mind blank. All his wealth, all his businesses seemed meaningless before that image. Later, deep into the night after the storm outside had calmed, he entered the room. Helena had gone home to change, promising to be back soon. Arthur sat in the armchair beside the bed, watching Liv's chest rise and fall gently. He reached out and touched her hair, damp and soft. It was the first time in a long time he had been alone with her. Without the rush of a meeting or the ring of a phone, the silence was profound, filled only by the soft beeping of the machines. It was then that Liv's eyes fluttered beneath her lids. She stirred, a low moan escaping her lips. Arthur leaned in, his heart tight. She was dreaming, murmuring disjointed words in her feverish sleep. He brought his ear closer, trying to understand, and then a phrase formed, clear and chillingly sharp, cutting through the silence of the room. "The lady told me to be quiet." Liv fell still again, but for Arthur, the world had stopped spinning. It wasn't mommy, it was the lady. And the verb wasn't asked, it was told. Liv's words echoed in the aseptic silence of the room, lodging themselves in Arthur's mind with the precision of a glass shard. "The lady told me to be quiet." Every syllable was a piece that didn't fit the puzzle Helena had assembled. He, a man who had built his billion-dollar fortune by analyzing data and distrusting easy narratives, felt a chill run down his spine. Why the lady? Liv always called Helena by her name, or, on rare occasions of forced affection, Auntie Lena. Never the lady. The word was impersonal, distant. It was the description of a stranger. He tried to rationalize, to tell himself it was just the fever's delirium, a mental confusion caused by the infection. But the clarity in her voice, even in sleep, had a weight of truth he couldn't ignore. His gut instinct, a tool he rarely used in business, but which had saved him from bad investments in the past, screamed that something was deeply wrong. Just then, Helena returned, bringing with her the soft scent of expensive perfume and a tray with 2 coffees. She moved with a studied grace, the very picture of the devoted, shaken wife. "I got them to make us some fresh coffee. We need to stay strong for her," she said, her voice a whisper of complicity. Arthur watched her in silence, every gesture now filtered through a lens of suspicion. The way she adjusted Liv's blanket, the care with which she checked the IV drip, it all seemed a little rehearsed. It was the performance of a lifetime, and he, the main audience, was starting to notice the cracks in the set. "Are you sure there was no one else on the road, Helena? No parked cars? No one walking?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. She looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Arthur, how can you ask that? It was a downpour. There wasn't a soul in sight. Do you think I would have left her with a stranger?" The indignation in her voice was so convincing that for a moment he almost backed down. Almost. He stepped away, walking to the window and turning his back to her. He took out his phone and dialed the number for Marcus, his personal assistant and right-hand man for over a decade. "Marcus, I need a favor," he said, his voice low and firm. "I want a full report from the GPS system on Helena's car for today. Route, stops, everything. Tell them it's for a routine insurance procedure due to the stress of the incident." On the other end of the line, the ever-efficient Marcus confirmed the order without question. Hanging up, Arthur felt a pang of shame. He was investigating his own wife. The man who demanded absolute loyalty in his business was breaking the most fundamental trust in his marriage. But the feverish face of his daughter, abandoned in the dark, overrode any other consideration. The value of his fortune in dollars and euros seemed like dust compared to the fear of having failed to protect Liv. He spent the rest of the night on watch, refusing to leave the room. Helena, perhaps sensing the subtle shift in the atmosphere, kept a respectful distance, dozing on a couch in the corner. The morning sun was beginning to filter through the window when Liv finally woke up for real. Her eyes, large and still clouded by fever, blinked slowly, trying to focus on the unfamiliar surroundings. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice weak. Arthur was by her side in an instant, holding her small hand. "I'm right here, my love. You're safe." Helena approached quickly, a maternal smile on her face. "Oh, sweetheart, you gave us such a scare." She leaned down to kiss Liv's forehead, but the little girl's reaction was instant and unequivocal. Liv flinched, her whole body tensing, and turned her face into Arthur's chest, her eyes widening with a silent terror that had nothing to do with her illness. She didn't say a word, but her body screamed, and Arthur, seeing the pure fear in his daughter's eyes at Helena's simple touch, knew that the previous night's delirium was no delirium. It was an echo of the truth. Liv's gesture was as subtle as it was devastating. That slight flinch, the turning of her head, was a silent verdict that reverberated through the room with the force of an explosion. Arthur felt his daughter's body tremble in his arms, and his protective instinct, long dormant under layers of board meetings and profit spreadsheets, awoke with a savage fury. He looked up at Helena, who stood frozen beside the bed. The initial shock on her face was quickly replaced by an expression of deep hurt, a performance so well executed it would have convinced any audience. She's afraid of me," Helena whispered, tears welling in her eyes with impressive punctuality. "Arthur, the fever, the trauma, it's making her confused. She doesn't know what she's doing." The explanation was logical, almost irrefutable. But logic couldn't erase the image of the genuine terror he had seen in his daughter. Arthur didn't answer. He just settled Liv back against the pillows, speaking to her in a low, soothing tone he barely recognized himself. "It's all right, Angel. Daddy's here." He offered her a cup of water, and her small fingers closed around his, a weak but desperate grip. He turned to his wife, forcing an expression of exhaustion. "Helena, you're worn out. Why don't you go home and get some rest? I'll stay here. I promise to call if there's any change." He needed space. He needed to think without her presence, without the constant need to decipher her emotions. Surprisingly, she agreed without protest, perhaps realizing that insisting would be a strategic error. Before leaving, she leaned in and said, just for him to hear, "When this is all over, we need to think about professional help for her. This kind of shock can leave deep scars." It was a clever move, planting the seed of Liv's instability, turning the victim into an unreliable witness. Alone with his daughter, Arthur felt the weight of the world crash down on his shoulders. He, the man who managed billion-dollar investment funds and whose word could alter the course of the stock market, didn't know how to extract the truth from a terrified 6-year-old. He watched her pale face, her eyes following him with a mixture of trust and fear. Beside the bed, a nurse had left a drawing pad and some crayons. An idea sparked. "Do you want to draw a little, sweetheart?" he asked gently. Liv nodded hesitantly. Arthur placed the pad on her lap and spread out the colorful crayons. For a long time, she just stared at the blank page. Then, slowly, her small hand picked up a gray crayon. She drew thick, vertical lines. The rain. Then, a black rectangle. The car. A tiny stick figure beside it. He held his breath. Her hand hovered over the crayon box, and for an instant, it seemed she would pick up the red one. But then she shuddered, dropped the gray crayon as if it had burned her, and pushed the pad away, her eyes filling with tears again. The vibration of his phone startled him. It was Marcus. Arthur stood up and went into the hallway, his heart pounding erratically. "Go ahead," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. Marcus's voice on the other end was calm, but it carried a restrained urgency. "Sir, I have the information on Mrs. Helena's car GPS." Arthur closed his eyes, bracing himself for what was to come. He expected a strange route, an unexplained stop, something he could analyze, a piece of hard data in the emotional chaos. But what his assistant said next froze the blood in his veins, turning a hazy suspicion into a terrifying certainty. "Sir, the data has been erased. The entire route history from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. was deliberately wiped from the system. This isn't a glitch. Someone with access to the car's dashboard did it manually." The information from Marcus was like a key turning in a rusty lock. The click was sharp, final. Someone had erased the data. Deliberately, Arthur ended the call, the phone feeling like ice in his hand. A man who based every decision on verifiable information, who analyzed a company's cash flow and the profitability of his investments with surgical precision, was now facing an abyss of deception within his own home. The absence of data was, paradoxically, the most concrete evidence he had. He took a deep breath, forcing calm to settle over his fury. This wasn't a deal to be closed. It was a battle to be fought with silence and strategy. He returned to the room and found Liv asleep, her face finally serene and free from pain. He sat beside her, his heart tight with a mixture of love and remorse that nearly suffocated him. All his wealth, the empire he had built, felt like a sandcastle before the vulnerability of his daughter. 2 days later, Liv was discharged. The ride home was silent. The mansion, with its polished marble and curated art hanging on the walls, had never felt so cold and impersonal. Helena had orchestrated a quiet welcome, with Liv's favorite dish and balloons in her room, every detail designed to project an image of normalcy and care. But the atmosphere was heavy, laden with the unsaid. Arthur watched every interaction. Helena would try to hug the girl, who would dodge with a childlike naturalness, seeking refuge in her father's hand. She spoke to Liv in an overly sweet tone that now sounded false to Arthur's ears. He became his daughter's shield, taking over tasks he once delegated without a thought, helping her with dinner, reading her a story before bed, staying by her side until she drifted off to sleep. They were small gestures, but they were redrawing the map of power and affection within the house. That night, while Liv slept, Arthur went into his office. The screens flickered with stock quotes and the value of his funds in euros, a world of certainties that no longer brought him comfort. He called Marcus again. "The GPS won't give us anything. We need a new plan," he said, his voice low. "I want you to trace the most likely route Helena would have taken, including the shortcuts. Then, pull up every establishment with security cameras on that route. Gas stations, convenience stores, toll booths, all of them. I want the footage from the day of the incident." It was a search for a needle in a haystack, an investment of time and resources that might lead nowhere, but it was the only path he could see. On the other end of the line, Marcus simply said, "Consider it done, sir." His assistant's loyalty was one of the few assets Arthur still fully trusted. The tension in the house was palpable. Helena circled Arthur with ostentatious concern, suggesting he was working too much, that the stress was consuming him. "You need to take care of yourself, darling. This obsession of yours isn't good for you or for Liv." The word obsession hit him. She was subtly painting him as unstable, just as she had tried to do with their daughter. He stared at her, his eyes cold. "I'm just taking care of what's important, Helena. Maybe for the first time in a long time." The reply left her speechless, a rare moment when her mask slipped, revealing a flash of panic in her eyes before it was quickly replaced by a look of hurt. He knew time was running out. He needed proof, something irrefutable, before she could turn the tables completely and convince him, and perhaps the world, that he was losing his mind. The following afternoon, as he tried unsuccessfully to focus on a report for a new venture, his phone rang. It was Marcus, and his usually monotone, professional voice held a note of restrained excitement that made Arthur's heart race. "Sir, I think I found something. A gas station attendant on the Sawmill River Parkway. It's a small, isolated place. Their security camera is old, low quality, but the man has an excellent memory." Arthur leaned over his desk, holding his breath. He remembers a black sedan pulled over on the shoulder for a long time, because of the storm. He said he thought it was strange, but that's not what caught his attention. Marcus paused, and Arthur could hear the rustle of papers. The attendant said that when the rain let up for a moment, he saw the woman driving get out of the car to open the back door, and he clearly remembers what she was wearing. He said it was impossible to miss, even from a distance. It was a dress, a vivid red dress. Red. The color exploded in Arthur's mind with the violence of a fire alarm. A vivid red dress. The image was so specific, so visceral, that it dispelled any lingering doubt he might have had. He thanked Marcus with a coolness that barely concealed the storm inside him, and hung up. For a long moment, he stood motionless in the middle of his lavish office, the screens blinking with the profitability of his financial applications. A universe of logic and control that now seemed like a bad joke. A man had built a multi-billion-dollar fortune, a net worth that placed him among the most powerful men in the country. Yet he had been deceived so primally within his own home. The humiliation was almost as painful as the guilt. He now had a piece of data, an external piece of information that didn't come from his daughter's fever, but from an eyewitness. The truth was beginning to take shape, and it was uglier than he had ever imagined. He needed to be careful. Confronting Helena directly would be an amateur mistake. She would deny it, cry, accuse him of being delusional. She was a master at twisting reality into a narrative that favored her. No, he needed more. He needed something that would corner her, leave her with no way out. The answer, he knew, was with Liv. The next afternoon, he found the drawing pad the nurse had left at the hospital. The page with the rain, the black car, and the stick figure was still there. He took the pad and went to the living room, where Helena was reading a design magazine, The Picture of Serenity. He sat down across from her, placing the drawing on the coffee table. "I found this with the things from the hospital," he said, his tone casual. "Liv started drawing this, but she stopped. A little stick figure," and he pointed to the red crayon still in the box. "She seemed to get scared of this color." Helena lowered the magazine, her eyes glancing at the drawing with studied disinterest. "Oh, the poor thing," she murmured, her voice full of rehearsed compassion. "Her imagination must be a mess. Trauma can create false memories, Arthur. The doctors warned us about that." She reached for the paper. "We should probably throw this away. We don't want anything to make her relive that day." But Arthur was faster. He placed his hand over the drawing, stopping her from taking it. Their eyes met across the table, and for the first time, the silent war between them became explicit. "No," he said, his voice low and sharp. "I think we should keep it. It's important to understand what she's feeling." In that instant, as he stared at the red crayon, a memory hit him with the force of a punch. The launch party for one of his new ventures. 6 months ago, Helena had been stunning, the center of attention, and she was wearing a red silk dress by a famous Italian designer, a vivid, unmistakable red. He remembered thinking how the color enhanced her dark hair, how she looked like the personification of success and power at his side. The image was so clear he could almost smell her perfume, hear the clinking of champagne glasses. The witness was not mistaken. Helena owned that dress. The certainty filled him with a glacial calm. He stood up, leaving the drawing on the table, a silent trophy of his small victory. Helena watched him, a flicker of panic in her eyes, before she masked it with a sigh of frustration. That night, he waited until she was fast asleep, her breathing calm and even beside him in the immense bed. Then, silently, he got up and walked to her closet. It was a room the size of a small apartment, with row after row of designer clothes, shoes, and bags, the material possessions that had defined much of their life. Arthur's heart pounded against his ribs. He knew exactly where to look. In the formal gowns section, his fingers slid over expensive fabrics, pushing the pieces aside one by one. He went past the blacks, the blues, the golds, and then he reached the end of the section. He looked again, running his hands through the empty space. The red dress wasn't there. The empty space in the closet screamed louder than any confession. The red dress was gone. Its absence was proof of premeditation, a cold confirmation that Helena was not just cruel, but also calculating. Arthur backed away slowly, the silence of the house amplifying the sound of his own breathing. The rage he expected to feel didn't come. In its place, an icy clarity settled in. The same clarity he felt before closing a major deal or dismantling a rival company. Emotion was a luxury he could no longer afford. He was dealing with an opponent who played to win at all costs, and the prize was control of his life and the well-being of his daughter. He returned to bed, lying down beside Helena with infinite care not to wake her. Lying in the darkness, he watched her sleep, her serene face framed by dark hair, and wondered who the woman sharing his life truly was. The public image he had helped build, the billionaire's perfect wife, was a sham. But what lay beneath? In the days that followed, Arthur moved with a renewed purpose. He knew the physical evidence of the dress was gone, likely burned or discarded somewhere unreachable. Confronting her about it would be pointless. He needed a new approach, one that exploited her psychology, not just her actions. He began searching for anything that might reveal a crack in her facade. Credit card receipts, bank statements, emails. He looked for an unexplained purchase, an unmentioned trip, a pattern of behavior that deviated from her meticulously organized routine. But Helena was careful. Her digital and financial life was as flawless as her appearance. There was nothing, Frustrated, he sat in the armchair of her office, a space decorated in shades of white and gold, the antithesis of his own functional study. His gaze scanned the room and stopped on an ornate wooden box on the highest shelf of a bookcase. It was an object he had never seen her open. Driven by an impulse, he climbed onto a chair and took down the box. It was unlocked. Inside was a jumble of mementos from Helena's past, from a life before him. There were college photos, yellowed letters tied with a satin ribbon, an old theater program. He felt like an intruder, sifting through the wreckage of a life that didn't belong to him. He was about to close the box, feeling a pang of shame for his invasion, when a thick envelope at the bottom caught his eye. Inside was a series of old photographs, their colors slightly faded by time. Most were of a young Helena, smiling alongside friends he didn't recognize, and then he pulled out the last photo. His heart stopped. The image froze in his hands. In it, a much younger Helena, perhaps in her early 20s, smiled at the camera. Beside her, with an arm around her shoulders, was another woman, a woman whose smile haunted his dreams, whose face he saw every time he looked at Liv. It was Sophia, his late wife. The two of them were together, looking like the best of friends, in a photograph taken years before Arthur had even met Helena. Arthur's world, already cracked, now shattered into a million pieces. The woman he had married was not a stranger who had entered his life by chance. She knew his wife, and she had never, in all their years of marriage, mentioned a single word about it. The air seemed to thin in the small office. Arthur stared at the photograph, at the two smiling faces frozen in time, and felt the ground of his reality dissolve. Sophia and Helena, the woman he had loved and lost, and the woman he thought he knew. The coincidence was impossible, the omission monstrous. Every conversation, every gesture of affection from Helena over the years reconfigured in his mind, shifting from an act of love to a move in a long, incomprehensible game. He wasn't just a cheated husband, he was a fool. A man who had opened the doors of his most intimate sanctuary to the wrong person. Helena's presence in his life was not a twist of fate, but a deliberate choice, a silent infiltration whose motives he couldn't even begin to fathom. The jealousy she showed toward Liv, the act of cruelty on the road, it all took on a new, sinister dimension. It wasn't just a stepdaughter's envy, it was something deeper, older, something rooted in her friendship with Sophia. With trembling hands, he put the photograph back in the envelope and buried it at the bottom of the box, exactly as he had found it. He placed the box back on the shelf, erasing any trace of his discovery. The discipline that had made him a billionaire took over. To show his hand now would be a fatal mistake. He needed to understand the extent of the lie before he could act. He returned to their bedroom and lay down beside Helena, her body inches from his. Yet an abyss of deceit separated them. He felt like a stranger in his own bed, in his own life. All his assets, his businesses, and his net worth felt like a useless suit of armor against this betrayal that was corroding him from within. The next morning, he watched her at breakfast. Every word she spoke sounded like an echo in a cavern of lies. "You look tired, Arthur. Didn't you sleep well?" she asked, the concern in her voice sounding like a slow poison. Just thinking about business," he replied, his face an impenetrable mask. He saw her now with a painful clarity, the calculated smiles, the touches designed to soothe and control. As she talked about a charity event, he remembered the photograph. Two young women smiling, full of life. What had happened between them? What secret was Helena guarding so fiercely that she would hide her own history? Later, he took Liv for a walk in the garden. The little girl, feeling her father's constant and attentive presence, was beginning to blossom again. She ran after a butterfly, her laughter echoing through the air. Arthur watched her, and in her every gesture he saw a ghost of Sophia. The way she tilted her head, the sparkle in her eyes. The discovery about Helena had made his mission even more sacred. He wasn't just protecting his daughter from the present, he was protecting her mother's legacy from the past. He scooped Liv into his arms and held her tight. "I love you so much, my little one," he whispered, more to himself than to her. It was a promise, an oath made to Sophia's memory. Back in his office, the solitude enveloped him. He knew Marcus couldn't help him with this. It was too personal, too dangerous. He needed someone who knew Sophia, someone who might remember her friendships from her youth. His mind ran through a list of names, most of whom he hadn't seen in years. And then one name stood out: Clara, Sophia's older sister. They had been inseparable. Arthur and Clara had never been close. After Sophia's passing, grief had opened a distance between them that was never bridged. But Clara was his only hope. She was the keeper of Sophia's memories. With his heart hammering in his chest, he picked up his phone and found her number in his old address book. With each ring of the call, his anxiety grew. What if she didn't answer? What if she refused to speak to him? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a voice answered. A voice he hadn't heard in almost 7 years. "Hello?" Arthur closed his eyes and took a deep breath, preparing to reopen wounds he thought had scarred over forever. "Clara, it's Arthur." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a few seconds, but to Arthur, it felt like an eternity. It was a dense silence, heavy with the weight of 7 years of grief and distance. "Arthur," Clara's voice finally came, and it held no surprise, only a deep weariness, as if she'd been expecting this call on some subconscious level. "To what do I owe the honor?" The tone was polite, but cold as steel. Arthur felt awkward, disarmed. He, who negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts and managed a net worth many countries would envy, couldn't find the right words to begin this conversation. His fortune was useless here, his power irrelevant. He was just a man seeking answers at the bottom of a well of pain he himself had helped dig with his absence. "Clara, I know it's been a long time," he began, his voice lower than usual. "I'm sorry for that. I was calling because I was looking at some old pictures of Sophia with Liv, and—" He paused, the lie feeling flimsy even to himself. "The truth is, I found something I don't understand." He heard her breathing on the other end, a cautious sound. "What did you find, Arthur?" she asked, and for the first time there was a note of curiosity in her voice. He knew he had to tread carefully, as if crossing a minefield. "I found a photo of Sophia with a friend I didn't know, a young woman with dark hair. They seemed very close." He took a deliberate pause before uttering the name. "Her name is Helena." The reaction was immediate and violent. Arthur heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by a dead silence. When she spoke again, her voice was a tense whisper, stripped of all its earlier politeness. "Where did you find that picture?" The question wasn't casual, it was a demand. "It doesn't matter where I found it," Arthur replied, firmness returning to his voice. "What matters is that this woman, Helena, is my wife. And she never told me she knew Sophia." The sound Clara made was a mixture of shock and horror. "Your wife? Arthur, you married Helena? Are you telling me she's living in your house, near Liv?" The urgency in her voice tied a knot in Arthur's stomach. This wasn't the reaction of someone remembering an old falling out between friends. It was the reaction of someone hearing the name of a predator. "Clara, what happened between them? Please, I have to know," he almost begged, his billionaire's pride undone by the desperation of a father. "Not over the phone," she said, her voice categorical. "This isn't something to talk about over the phone. It's not safe." The word safe hit him hard. What kind of secret was so dangerous it couldn't be spoken over a phone line? "Where and when?" Arthur asked, ready to cancel any meeting, postpone any deal. He would fly across the country if he had to. "Tomorrow." "My house. Come alone," she ordered. He agreed instantly. There was a final moment of silence before they hung up. And then Clara said something that would be seared into his mind, a warning that would turn his anxiety into pure fear. "Arthur, be careful," she whispered, her voice heavy with an old sorrow. "Some people don't break you with one blow. They're like slow-acting poison. By the time you finally realize the damage, it's already too late." The drive to Clara's house was a journey into a past Arthur had sealed away. He drove through neighborhoods he hadn't visited since Sophia was alive, tree-lined streets and houses with gardens, a universe of suburban normalcy that contrasted violently with his reality of skyscrapers and helipads. Each mile took him further from the business empire he commanded and closer to the man he had been, a husband, a father, someone whose greatest assets were measured in hugs and smiles. Clara's warning, slow-acting poison, echoed in his mind, recontextualizing every memory of Helena. Her affection now seemed like a strategy, her efficiency as a hostess, a maneuver for control, her love, a performance. He, the multimillionaire who prided himself on his ability to read people at a negotiating table, had failed the most important assessment of his life. He had invited a toxic liability into the heart of his emotional portfolio. Clara's house was just as he remembered, modest, cozy, and filled with plants. She met him at the door, her face marked by time and grief, but her eyes, the same eyes as Sophia's, still shone with a sharp intelligence. There were no hugs or formalities. She led him to a small living room where the scent of old books and chamomile tea hung in the air. She served him a cup without asking if he wanted one. "So," she began, sitting in an armchair across from him, "tell me about the photograph." Arthur described the image, the box, the discovery. As he spoke, he watched Clara. She listened with an intensity that left him feeling bare, as if she could see through all the layers of power and money he wore as armor. When he finished, she sighed, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Helena wasn't just a friend, Arthur. She was Sophia's shadow. Clara began to tell the story, and the room seemed to darken. They had met in college, inseparable. Sophia, with her natural light and genuine kindness. Helena, with her voracious ambition and a magnetic charm that always felt a little studied. In the beginning, it was a beautiful friendship, Clara said. But over time, Helena's admiration turned into something unhealthy. She started imitating Sophia in everything, the way she dressed, her haircut, even the way she laughed. She wanted Sophia's life, and when Sophia met you, a successful man with a rising fortune, her obsession found a focus. Arthur felt a chill. He remembered how Helena, when they first met, seemed to share Sophia's interests, to like the same music, the same movies. He had thought it a happy coincidence, a sign of fate. Now, he saw the horrifying truth. It was a script. Sophia started to pull away, Clara continued, her voice choked with emotion. She felt that Helena no longer saw her as a friend, but as a target. The last straw was when Sophia found out Helena had lied to get an internship at your company, using Sophia's name as a reference without permission. She confronted her. The fight was terrible. Helena didn't cry, didn't apologize. She became cold, calculating. She told Sophia that one day she would have everything she had and more. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. The woman who had abandoned his daughter in the rain was the same one who, years earlier, had sworn to steal her mother's life. He stood up, pacing the small room, feeling trapped. "I didn't know any of this. Sophia never told me." "Of course she didn't," Clara said, her voice filled with a bitter sadness. "She didn't want to poison your happiness with Helena's darkness. She decided to just cut ties and move on, to protect you and herself." The revelation was crushing, but Clara wasn't finished. She looked at him, her eyes filled with an urgency that froze him to the bone. "Arthur, there's one more thing, something I never told anyone, not even the police at the time, because it sounded crazy." She paused, gathering her courage. "The week of the car accident, Sophia called me. She was terrified. She said Helena had reached out to her again after years of silence, and she said something I will never forget. Clara, she doesn't just want what I have. She wants to erase who I am. The drive home was a descent into hell. Clara's words replayed in Arthur's mind like a macabre mantra. She doesn't just want what I have. She wants to erase who I am. Every traffic light, every street sign seemed distorted, as if he were seeing the world through shattered glass. The fortune he had amassed, his vast portfolio of stocks and gold, all seemed futile, a sick joke. He had built a castle, but left the gate open for the dragon. Helena wasn't a jealous stepmother. She was a usurper, a patient hunter who had waited years for the final strike. Their marriage wasn't a new beginning for Arthur. It was Helena's checkmate. And Liv, the living embodiment of Sophia's memory, was the last piece that needed to be removed from the board for her to claim victory. The abandonment on the road hadn't been an impulsive act of cruelty. It was an attempted erasure. When he parked the car in the mansion's garage, the silence of the house greeted him like a shroud. This place, once a symbol of his success and power, now felt like a mausoleum, a monument to his own blindness. Every flower vase, every painting on the wall chosen by Helena seemed to mock him. He walked inside and found her in the living room, flipping through a photo album, the recent photos of the happy family she had manufactured. She looked up and smiled, the perfect wife mask firmly in place. "You were gone a while, darling. I was getting worried." Her voice, once a sound of comfort, now grated on his ears like broken glass. He had to maintain control. The slightest change in his demeanor would alert her that the game had changed. "I had to sort out some loose ends from an old investment," he lied, the excuse coming with a facility that frightened him. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands steady, belying the turmoil in his soul. He decided to test her, to poke the cage and see if the beast would show its teeth. He sat in the opposite armchair, the photo album between them. "You know," he began, his tone thoughtful. "Liv did something today that reminded me so much of Sophia." He watched Helena's face, searching for a micro-expression, a flicker of hesitation. Anything. Nothing. Her smile only grew softer, more compassionate. "Of course it did, my love," she said, reaching out and placing her hand on his. "Liv is a little piece of Sophia that stayed with us. That's why it's so important to me that she feels loved and safe. To honor her mother's memory." The performance was so flawless, so devoid of any crack, that a shiver ran down Arthur's spine. She wasn't just lying. She believed her own farce. Or worse, she was so devoid of empathy that she could simulate the perfect emotion for any occasion. In that moment, he understood the true nature of his opponent. Exposing the truth wouldn't be enough. Helena would twist the facts, play the victim, perhaps even accuse him of emotional instability, as she had already tried to do. He needed something irrefutable, a proof that would dismantle her completely, leaving no room for manipulation. This was no longer about saving his marriage or his reputation. It was a rescue operation. He had to rescue his daughter and the memory of his first wife from the clutches of the woman living under his roof. That night, he went to Liv's room. The girl was asleep, her face peaceful under the soft glow of a nightlight. He sat on the edge of her bed, just watching her breathe, feeling a protective love so fierce it physically ached. She was all that mattered. All his capital, all his businesses, would be sacrificed without hesitation to ensure her safety. His gaze fell on the drawing pad on her nightstand. It was open to a new page. Curious, he picked it up. It was the same scene as before. The pouring rain, the black car, the stick figure huddled on the ground. But there was something new. Next to the figure of the girl was another, larger one. A woman. And this time, she wasn't just an outline. Liv had filled in the dress with a strong, aggressive scribble of red crayon. The woman's face had no eyes, no nose, just a mouth open in a silent scream, a blur of black and red, and from inside that scream, a single word was written in the shaky, uncertain handwriting of a terrified child: vanish. Liv's drawing was more than evidence. It was a weapon. Arthur held the piece of paper with a delicacy that contrasted with the cold fury consuming him. The word vanish, scrawled with the desperate force of a child, was a final verdict. He needed nothing more. All the pieces had clicked into place, forming a monstrous picture of deceit and cruelty. He stayed up all night, not from anxiety, but in a state of hypervigilance, like a general planning the final attack. He watched the sun rise over the city, the golden light flooding his office, but he felt no warmth. His world had become a cold, dangerous place, and his only duty was to protect his most precious asset, the only holding that truly mattered. He no longer thought of his net worth, his investments, or his company's cash flow. He thought only of the terrified look in his daughter's eyes. As the house began to stir, he placed the drawing on his immense mahogany desk. The childish, terrifying image looked out of place amidst market reports and stock charts. He waited. It didn't take long. Helena entered, carrying a cup of coffee, her usual morning smile on her face. "Good morning, darling. You're already work." She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes fell on the drawing. The smile faltered for a fraction of a second before reassembling itself. Arthur remained silent, letting the image speak for itself. He watched her, the predator watching his prey, finally step into the trap. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a little higher than normal. "Liv drew this last night?" Arthur replied, his tone dangerously calm. "I wanted your opinion. What do you think she meant by vanish?" He pointed to the word. Helena forced a laugh, a sound that was fragile and brittle. "Arthur, for God's sake. It's a child's drawing. She's confused, scared. We've talked about this. Your obsessing over these scribbles is only going to make things worse for her." She moved closer, reaching for the paper. "Let's just throw this away and don't touch it." Arthur's voice cut through the air like a blade. She recoiled, startled by the intensity in his tone. It was then that he stood, walking slowly around the desk until he was facing her. The space between them was charged with an electric tension. "I remembered something, Helena, a story Sophia told me a long time ago, about a friend who admired her so much she wanted to be her, wanted to have her clothes, her friends, her life." Helena's face went pale. The mask of the devoted wife began to disintegrate, revealing the panic beneath. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the door. "Yes, you do, Guy," Arthur continued, his voice relentless. "You knew her very well, didn't you? So well that after she was gone, you saw the perfect opportunity to finish what you started. You didn't marry me, Helena. You married Sophia's widower. You didn't become Liv's stepmother. You tried to take her mother's place." Every word was a blow. He saw recognition and hatred spark in her eyes. "She never appreciated you," Helena spat, the venom finally surfacing. "She had everything and she didn't deserve it. You, the fortune, the perfect daughter, she didn't know what to do with any of it." The confession came not as an apology, but as an accusation filled with envy. Arthur picked up the drawing from the desk. "You didn't abandon her on that road out of jealousy. You abandoned her because every time you look at her, you see Sophia. You see the living proof that you are a fraud, a cheap copy, and you wanted her to vanish." He held the paper out to her. "Her wish is going to come true, but she's not the one who's going to vanish." He stepped back behind his desk, his expression as hard as granite. "Get your things. I want you out of my house by nightfall." Helena's mask finally dropped, not with a crash, but with a terrifying silence. Faced with Arthur's final command, the rage on her face dissolved into a cold, calculating emptiness. There were no tears, no pleas, no denials. There was only the frigid acceptance of defeat. She stared at him for a long moment. her dark eyes empty of any emotion he could recognize, and then she turned and walked out of the office without another word. The silence she left behind was heavy, but cleansing. Arthur felt no triumph, only an immense, painful relief, like the feeling after a crushing weight has been lifted from your lungs. He sank into his chair, Liv's drawing still in his hands, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to truly breathe. The battle was over. He listened to the quiet sounds of her departure. The maids, sensing the seismic shift in the home's atmosphere, moved silently, helping to pack her bags. There was no shouting or arguing. Helena's exit was as methodical and controlled as the life she had tried to build there. In less than 2 hours, it was done. Arthur remained in his office, the sanctuary that now felt like his own again. He heard the front door open and close. He heard the soft sound of a car's engine driving away down the long driveway. And then, silence. A deep, complete silence that seemed to cleanse the air, sweeping away the last traces of poison and manipulation. The fortune he had built, the house that was a symbol of his success, finally felt like a home. He stood and walked slowly through the mansion. The spaces that had once seemed cold and impersonal, decorated with Helena's impeccable and distant taste, now just felt empty, and the emptiness was welcome. It was a blank canvas, a chance to start over. He went to Liv's room. She was sitting on the floor, playing with her building blocks, absorbed in her own little world. She looked up when he entered, and for the first time since that night on the road, there was no shadow of fear in her eyes. Just a childlike curiosity. He knelt beside her, his body aching from the tension of the past few days. "She's gone," he said softly. He didn't need to say the name. Liv understood. She didn't smile or ask any questions. She just looked at him, her eyes large and serious, and then, in a gesture of pure, absolute trust, she nestled her head on his shoulder, a gesture worth more than all the gold in his vaults. In that moment, he knew the reconstruction of his most valuable empire, his family, had begun. He hugged her back, feeling the tears he had held back for so long finally stream down his face, not from sorrow, but from an overwhelming gratitude. He had lost a counterfeit wife, but he had found his way back to his daughter, and that was the only transaction that, in the end, mattered. The days that followed were of a strange and welcome calm. The mansion, once a stage for Helena's performance, began to fill with real life. Arthur cancelled all his international trips and cut his meetings to the bare minimum. He relearned the small rituals he had forgotten, the right temperature for Liv's milk, the story that made her giggle before bed, the way she liked her hair to be brushed. He discovered that his daughter had a sharp sense of humor and an insatiable curiosity about the stars. He discovered that she didn't care for the expensive toys he bought, but loved when he sat on the floor to build a blanket fort with her. Slowly, the workaholic billionaire faded away, and in his place, a father re-emerged. The guilt was still there, a shadow in his heart, but it was now balanced by the growing light of rediscovered love. The true return on his days was no longer measured in dividends or interest, but in his daughter's laughter. He realized that for years he had been mismanaging his assets, focusing on material goods while his most precious treasure languished from neglect. The legacy he truly wanted to leave Liv was not a business empire, but the certainty that she was, and always would be, unconditionally loved. A month passed. Spring arrived, painting the mansion's garden with vibrant colors that seemed to reflect the new mood of the house. The silence left by Helena had been filled with music, laughter, and conversations that stretched through dinner. Arthur, the man who once measured time in fiscal quarters, now measured it by the seasons, by the small changes in his daughter's face. He sold a significant portion of his shares in a tech company, a move that shocked the stock market, but to him, was the most logical decision he had ever made. The acquired capital didn't go into a new cryptocurrency or high-risk fund. It went to create a foundation in Sophia's name, dedicated to helping vulnerable children. Wealth, he was learning, only had value when it served a purpose greater than mere accumulation. His net worth remained vast, but his definition of profit had changed forever. Liv blossomed under her father's attentive care. The nightmares became rare, and the drawings of rain and darkness were replaced by yellow suns, rainbows, and two stick figures, a tall man and a small girl, always holding hands. The red crayon, once a trigger for terror, was now used to draw hearts and apples. She was healing, and in healing her, Arthur was healing himself. He finally understood that love wasn't a liability, a distraction from his goals, but the most fundamental asset of all, the one that gave meaning to everything else. One day, under a cloudless blue sky, he made a decision. He put Liv in the car and drove. She didn't ask where they were going. She trusted him implicitly. He drove down roads that became quieter and quieter until he reached that desolate stretch of the Sawmill River Parkway. He stopped the car on the same shoulder. The place, in the bright sunlight, looked completely different. It was just a road, with green grass and wildflowers growing on the verge. He turned off the engine and turned to Liv. "Do you remember this place?" he asked softly. She looked out the window and nodded, her body tensing slightly. Arthur got out of the car and opened her door, holding out his hand. "Come with me, you don't have to be scared." Hesitantly, she took his hand and stepped out. He led her to the exact spot where he had found her. He knelt in front of her, so their eyes were level. "Something very bad happened here," he said with simple sincerity. "But it wasn't your fault, and it will never happen again. Because from today on, this isn't a place of fear anymore. It's the place where Daddy found you. It's the place where we started over." He hugged her, and she buried her face in his neck, her small body relaxing in his arms. They stayed there for a long time, the sun warming their backs. When they pulled apart, Liv looked at the road, then at him, and a small smile touched her lips. Together, they walked back to the car, leaving the ghost of that rainy night behind forever. As he drove home, her small hand holding his, Arthur knew, with a certainty no financial report could ever give him, that he was the richest man in the world.